Welcome to Proof of PR, your passport to the world of public relations for Bitcoin and Web3. I'm your host, Kelley Weaver, CEO of Melrose PR, a leading provider of communications and PR strategy in our unique industry. Get ready for an inside look into the future of finance, technology, and entrepreneurship from those driving innovation in the space. Join us as we learn how they generate headlines, cut through the noise, and grow their brand awareness through media placements, press mentions, and thought leadership. These are the stories behind their success. This is Proof of PR. Hey everyone, today I am so excited to be joined by John Wu, who is an investor at Asylum Ventures. Welcome, John.
Thank you so much, Kelley. Pleasure to be here.
So happy to have you. We've recently connected, but I've been following along on Twitter for a long time, or X, I guess we call it now. But tell me a little bit about your background and how you got first introduced to crypto.
Yeah, I can be quick with the early background. Let's see. I was a philosophy undergrad, and my joke about that was I was so bad at philosophy that I became a management consultant. I did that for a couple of years. I did private equity for a couple of years. I went to business school, so very linear, traditional background. And then after that, I did a smattering of startups. The last one that I did was an incubated food trucks as a service startup in New York. We launched that into 2020, into the worst F&B buying environment of all time. And very quickly had to shut it down within a year. And the way I dropped into crypto is that my now business partner, Nick Churls, formerly of Notation Capital, pinged me, I want to say January 2021. That was the time I bought my first ETH. And he was like, you should check out DeFi and what's going on there. You're a finance guy, you did private equity, you understand markets. And I was totally blown away by the idea of permissionless finance as somebody who had sat in an office and had bankers pitch us constantly for refinancings and the amount of legal overhead we had to do to execute financial transactions. I was like, oh, with a click of a button, I can access permissionless liquidity and swaps and lending. It was completely mind-blowing to me. And that's what sent me down the rabbit hole. I think I spent the first 3 weeks just calling friends about Uniswap V2, trying to understand LPing, trying to understand impermanent loss, building models around it, being like, okay, I think I finally get X times Y equals K. And that was the entry point.
Wow. So it's fairly recent, but it sounds like you fell down the rabbit hole fairly quickly.
Yeah, I went very quick. And I think I made my name on Twitter originally by essentially covering DeFi blowups. And so I covered a couple of the early ones. And then for a minute there, I had this reputation as like crypto's obituary writer, which was never really my purpose. I really was trying to just explain what was going on because I was trying to figure out what was going on. And so I remember the first thing I covered was the Fei protocol blow up. I wasn't even in crypto at all. I had gone on a plane and saw that there was something happening with the stablecoin. And I spent the next 4 hours on the plane crafting a Twitter thread. I posted it and then I closed my laptop and I'm like, all right, well, time to go to bed. And, I land, I get home, I open the laptop and it has like 4,000 likes. There's journalists in my DMs and there was really no turning back after that. That at that point, crypto kind of got its claws on me. And then, haven't looked back since.
You just made it a really interesting point. So this Twitter thread led to you all of a sudden becoming like an overnight thought leader that reporters were reaching out to as a source. Did I catch that right?
I think that's basically right. And it tells you a couple of things. Number one, it tells you how low the bar was for coverage and how hard it was to understand what was going on a couple of years ago. It's still very small. Crypto is still very niche in the grand scheme of things. But 3 years ago, it was like extraordinarily niche. It was extraordinarily obscure. I mean, the 2017 and the 2013 OGs probably wouldn't say that. But, in 2021, the universe just wasn't that big. And a true schmo like me could walk off the street and add value onto the timeline. By the way, I don't think that's possible anymore. It's so competitive. There's so many intelligent people offering coverage now. But back then, it really was that easy. And that's what I've always loved about crypto is how meritocratic it is. You can truly walk in off the street. And if you're additive, someone will be like, you're hired. Someone will be like, I want to work with you.
That's interesting to hear you say that you think it's shifted that much since 2021.
Yeah, I think that I see a lot of intelligent voices on the timeline now. If you were to just offer basic explanatory coverage, back then, speaking as if I was a journalist, I'm not. But back then, I could actually read a white paper or go to docs.protocol.com and just offer a summary of how it worked on Twitter. And people will be like, thank you so much. Thank you so much for saving me the time. I now get this. That is extraordinarily commoditized as a service now. And the bar for content, the bar for whatever you want to call it, thought leadership, analysis. It's so much deeper. Somebody that I admire in the space, John Charbonneau, I mean, he's literally publishing 65-page deep dives on things like L2s and sequencing. And that's the bar now. You have to essentially write a tome that takes 2 to 3 weeks, I think, to be differentiated if you're going to produce content.
Yeah, I think, and also the fact that you were able to be sort of a source right away overnight is really interesting, but it also goes to show that Twitter is such a powerful tool, in my opinion, which I know we're going to talk more about, but that you have all of a sudden folks who want to hear your perspective have instant access to you, and you can start those dialogues really from nowhere to somewhere overnight, it sounds like.
And the other thing about Twitter, and I can't say it's exactly the same anymore, but it used to be such a gold mine for journalists and citizen journalists because people would offer their analysis. And every single time I ever wrote a thread, I didn't have 100% original opinions or thoughts. I was collating information from other people offering coverage, piecing together different perspectives, applying my own research. I mean, I remember when Luna crashed, I had dug into that project 6 months prior. I mean, I had known about it for a long time, but I had really dug in around the stablecoin design like 6 months prior. And so I had a bunch of content ready to go, but in the days preceding, the depegging, I was reading everyone else's analysis. I was staying on top of it. And so I worry now that Twitter is not as conducive to that type of like collaborative journalism or collaborative analysis or whatever you want to call it. Just because the timeline it's not that linear anymore. And so it's much more fragmented. And I find it much harder to bring together what the hive mind is thinking about any one thing. And it's unfortunate that that's the case, but we have to adapt.
Well, we'll talk more about Twitter in a bit, but I want to know more about Asylum Ventures. Tell me about it and why the name.
Yeah. So Asylum is a $55 million pre-seed and seed fund based in Brooklyn, New York. It's in some ways a fund for. So my business partner, Nick Churls, was formerly of Notation Capital. He ran 3 funds very exceptionally. We have a fantastic institutional base of LPs. He brought the entire LP base over to Asylum. So in some ways, it's a fund for. In some other ways, it's a fund one. We're a totally different brand. We're a slightly different team. I'm new to the team. Nick and Mackenzie, my other partners, are carryovers from Notation. And we spent a lot of time thinking about the name, and we explored. I mean, we probably threw the dictionary at the thing. Part of this is because the namespace for venture is so saturated right now in the post-ZERP world. And we were kind of forced to be a little bit more bolder with our naming as a result, which I think was the correct outcome. Asylum was a name that we came up with very, very early on and was inspired by David Geffen's indie label, Asylum Records. And we were very, very inspired by David Geffen's relationship as a producer to his artists. And so when we think about our role as venture capitalists, obviously we're a source of capital, but we're really a spiritual partner for this singular act of creation called making a company. And we think of that as the same way a great gallerist works with an artist, or a great producer works with a musical artist, or a great patron works with visual artists. We're very, very inspired by those relationships, which aren't purely business, but they're very trust-based and they're deeply personal. David Geffen was a friend and mentor to his portfolio, not a portfolio, but his label of artists. That's the type of trusted relationship that we want to build with our form of artists, startup founders, from the very earliest days. Because we know in the very beginning, nobody really knows the answer, especially not us. And as the artist, our job is not to look over your shoulder and say, paint over here, paint over there. Just like the great producers, their role was to give total creative freedom to their partners and to enable them to unlock a singular creative vision. So that's the type of person that we want to work with. And then, of course, it's undeniable. And we usually don't say this out loud, but I actually do think it's sometimes worthwhile to say out loud that the Asylum name has some connotations, right? It's this idea that like, maybe you're a little bit misunderstood. Maybe you're even a little bit crazy. Come into this space where we totally recognize what that feels like, and come work with us super closely on what it is that you're thinking about. And David Geffen had that idea, and we're very inspired by him, obviously, directly because of the name.
It's interesting you say about the slightly misunderstood. I mean, crypto definitely attracts a mixed crowd, but there is definitely a group of people who are drawn to this industry. And it is what sucked me in, honestly, initially, was really the people around it and the sort of this shared passion for bringing this to life. And so it's cool to hear you talk about that. And I'm curious, like the types of founders you work with, you've invested both in crypto, but also, more traditionally in your background. And so is there a difference here of the types of people? Is there a difference here in how you invest, based on like your prior experience and where you are today?
Yeah, for sure. So Notation has done a bunch of deals in crypto and non-crypto. So Notation, my partner Nick at Notation incubated Bison Trails, which later sold to Coinbase. When I think about my approach, and by the way, we're generalist investors. 20% of our portfolio is committed to crypto, and I'm predominantly focused on crypto, but we are generalists. And I actually really like seeing the contrast between crypto companies and non-crypto and being able to play both roles. But I spend the majority.
20% is crypto? Only 20%?
Yeah, exactly.
What's the other 80%?
Generalist investing across AI, bio, health, software. We kind of do everything, crypto being one of the verticals. And I spend most of my time on crypto. And Nick is, I would say, the vast majority of Nick's net worth and his historical returns have been in crypto. So we're deeply fixated on crypto. But I think we also like thinking about other problems that the world faces. So when it comes to companies that we've done historically, I mean, it's a broad mix, but Nick's been super successful investing in crypto. When I think about my approach, it really is this early, very, very partnership-oriented relationship. And I think that really works at pre-seed and seed. I think once you have takeoff velocity and you have a business model or you kind of understand where you're going, I think this notion of producer artist maybe is a little bit less impactful. And the other thing that we really orient on is kind of like an us versus them mentality. We really love working with founders who feel misunderstood, who feel like they're tackling a problem that is kind of not that sexy or has been stepped over by a bunch of people and it's not really noticed. Or maybe there are a lot of people who doubt that it can ever be a thing. Nick's story with incubating Bison Trails was he was like the TAM of institutional staking as a service when they started that company was maybe six figures. Right? No one would underwrite that based on the size of the market. Now, it turns out that's a very, very significant business, but you couldn't have possibly known that back then. You would have had to have deep belief. And so where we want to find ourselves is in a situation where the founder believes something and we meet them and we go, wow, we also really believe this. And no one else seems to believe this. And there's something very special in that relationship of us versus them, us against the world, where we both think this thing is very real and it seems like nobody else does.
Love it. You also have a really strong marketing background. What are some of the, milestones that you're most excited or like proud of from your background in sort of bringing projects to life?
Yeah, I mean, I've done work I spent most of my crypto career, honestly, at Aztec. I was the first marketing hire, second business hire. Aztec is a privacy first ZK rollup on Ethereum. And man, we did it all. We brought a product to market. We deprecated a product. We announced a bunch of fundraisers, rebuilt the brand multiple times, rebuilt websites multiple times. And I still work very closely with founders today on announcements. In terms of what I'm most proud of, I think predominantly our experiments within Aztec were very focused on how do we communicate with as few words as possible. So one of the experiments that I loved that we ran at Aztec is we wrote our positioning statement and we just kind of tweeted it. We were like, Aztec is a privacy first ZK rollup on Ethereum. And then we were like, okay, can we shorten that? Can we just use fewer words? And, we wrote a tweet that was something like a privacy first ZK rollup. And then we kept running these experiments until we just ended up with a tweet that just said one word. It just said privacy. And of all those tweets, just the one word tweet, just privacy, performed by far the best, like far better than all the others. And so I think all the time in communications about economy of words. How can you communicate what you're trying to say with as few English words as humanly possible? Because humans are very simple creatures. We don't have a ton of brain capacity. In order to insert yourself into my head, you need to be extraordinarily simple and the outline of your idea has to be hyper clear. So I think about this all the time when I work with teams on communication. I think a lot of folks pride themselves on how smart they are, and they have every right to. I think I've worked with some of the smartest founders, smartest humans I've ever met in my entire life, truly geniuses. And I think it requires a little bit of empathy and a little bit of, understanding how busy everyone is in their life to realize the way to express your intelligence is not by flexing, a paragraph worth of technical explanation. It's by creating this super sharp arrow of communication that anyone in the world will receive, very readily.
That's so true. And I love the story about the sort of sequencing of the tweets. And also, you've referenced a couple of times. I mean, I know you as johnwoo.eth on Twitter. And you do give a lot of spicy takes. Is there, and I think you sort of drum up this, I don't know, do you perhaps try to evoke a reaction out of tweets? And is there a strategy behind that?
No, I don't think so. I think I just probably, and this is something that I've thought about a lot as a personality type. I've always been very contrarian. I actually think the type of person who comes into crypto is inherently anti-authority, anti-institutional, kind of wants to stick the middle finger to a man or the man, just some kind of figure. So I think I've always had this contrarian streak about me. And it's not designed. If I have a spicy take, it's kind of just because I really actually feel that way. And I try to be as authentic to my thoughts as humanly possible. And I think the best founders, influencers, tweeters, content creators, communicators are the ones who are really true to themselves. And your audience, or if you don't like the word audience, the people who see what you write, it's really easy for them to tell whether you're being you. I don't really know what to ascribe that to. I think we could verge pretty quickly into woo-woo territory. But people can kind of tell whether you're on vibe or not on vibe. And so I try my very best to be as effortless as possible about what I write. Obviously acknowledging we have to write for the algorithm and for formatting, but my thoughts are genuinely just what I'm thinking at any given time.
One of the details that I love about you on Twitter is that it seems like your personal life is also intertwined because you are linked to Maggie Love, who is another amazing thought leader who I don't know personally, but I know of and only have heard the best things about her. So tell me about that and what it's like sort of at home if you're both sort of Twitter influencers in the crypto Twitter universe.
I mean, it's insane. It's insane. I mean, we joke about it all the time because the fund is now called Asylum, but it's an asylum. I mean, we are truly two insane people. We wake up and just like goat scream in each other's faces. We turn the music up super loud. I bet our neighbors hate us, and we kind of like get some dancing out of our system in the mornings. I really can't imagine being full-time in crypto and dating somebody who's not in crypto, or at least not somebody who tolerates it, right? I think of crypto as, let's call it a religion for now. And let's say I were Catholic, right? Maggie happens to be Catholic. It would be okay to date a non-Catholic, but it would not be okay to date somebody who doesn't tolerate your Catholicism, right? If it's a core part of your identity. Just like, I would be okay with dating somebody who's not in crypto, but I could never date somebody who doesn't tolerate crypto, who hates it, right? Or even somebody who's indifferent. I would need to be with somebody who's very supportive. And thankfully, Maggie's really deep. She ran an infrastructure company. She runs SheFi now and educates women on getting into the space. And we kind of have this, union of mind. We have two different brains that are thinking about the same problem all the time. And she's been so incredibly additive to my thinking in the space. And it just so happens that she's also just a lovely person who is the love of my life. And that's also amazing. And I really can't imagine doing it with anyone else.
Well, and congratulations to you two, because I think you're getting married soon. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We're getting married in August, but I kind of had this Ender's Game experience last weekend where, her parents wanted us to do a small Catholic ceremony. I'm not Catholic. And I was like, okay, that's great. We'll go do a small church ceremony. It'll kind of be a practice run for the real wedding. But it turns out, just like in Ender's Game, that the practice run was the real thing. Like, we actually got our marriage license, and now we're basically as married as we'll ever be, but we're just throwing a party in August. So it's kind of funny how that turned out. But no, I'm actually married now.
Well, congratulations. And
Thank you so much.
I need to have her on the podcast eventually, because I'd love to learn more about her journey and
for sure.
And SheFi. And honestly, only heard the most amazing things about her and her energy. When we connected recently, you told me that there's like a strategy to Twitter that is, you use the word spiritual. And so I'm really curious about that. Can you tell me more about what you mean by that and sort of how you see founders using Twitter well, and, what strategies you suggest for people?
Yeah. And I think this is going to get quote unquote spiritual pretty quickly. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from a mentor of mine, Trung Fan, who's a big creator on Twitter. He's got hundreds of thousands of followers. And Trung called me once and he said, John, if I have one piece of advice for you on creating anything at all, it's that nobody will remember your stinkers. People will only remember your winners. People will only remember the best things that you write. And almost by definition, that's true. Because if you think about the way social media works, if people don't engage, it doesn't drive the view count up and not that many people see it. And so if there's one piece of advice I would give to anyone doing anything in the world, I would say experiment more because people will not remember the failures. One of the hardest things that I think a founder or a creator has to go through is putting yourself out there and taking some L's. Experimenting, stretching yourself, making yourself a little bit vulnerable, spending hours on a piece of content or a product launch, putting it out in the world, and then watching truly zero reaction. And by the way, I had this experience when I first started creating on Twitter. People don't know this, but before I started doing crypto, I was interested in tweeting about real estate. Don't know why. I have a real estate background. I spent some years in real estate. I thought maybe people want to hear my thoughts about real estate. I have some lessons to share. I committed myself to writing something about real estate every day for 30 days. And I think I averaged 0 likes. And it's like very deeply painful and frustrating and disheartening to put a bunch of work into something and realize that truly nobody cares. But that's the only way to learn that nobody cares. And by the way, nobody remembers that about me. Nobody's like, John, you're such a loser. I remember reading all that 30 days of your real estate tweets and nobody liked them and you're pathetic. Nobody has ever said that, not once in my life. Again, almost by definition, because probably a grand total of like 200 people ever saw that stuff. You know what people do remember? They remember my top 5 tweets of all time. They remember my coverage of FTX, of Luna, of Faye Protocol, of my story with Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, the time that I almost got hacked by a North Korean. Those are great stories. And those are the only things that people remember. And so I think the spiritual journey of creating anything is realizing and accepting that a whole bunch of it is not going to work, but that's part of the creative process. And we shouldn't judge one another and definitely not ourselves about stuff that doesn't work. So what? You put out something bad, do it again. That's the other reason why we're so inspired by artists. I think there's incredible examples of artists out there who I remember, watching artists during COVID who were bored and they were like, hey, I want to share my artistic process with you. You know what the artistic process looks like? It doesn't look like a genius sitting down and creating a masterwork. It looks like creating 100 pieces of art and tossing out 95 of them. And I think that's really hard for people to accept. And I think the best founders and I think the best creators and the best artists accept that quote unquote failure is part of the learning process.
Agreed. And you learn from it. I think, failure creates resilience and resilience builds greatness, builds towards greatness. And I think this industry does attract a crowd, at least those who stick around, who are like used to weathering some resilience. Because as the market shifts, so does everything else in terms of like sentiment, needs, everything changes as the market changes, honestly.
100%. I don't think there's any way for you to find out what's going to work unless you find out what doesn't. And that's what I love about business building. And that's what I love. Every time I take an L on something, I'm like, this is an amazing data point. Anytime a customer or a partner or a founder says, I don't like this, I'm like, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Now I know what not to do. And I'll just go do it and try it again.
Well, I think, do you help founders with their Twitter presence? Is that something that you support them as part of the investing journey? Do you help them to think through their strategy? And what are your thoughts on actual projects having a Twitter presence versus the founders of the projects having a Twitter presence, if that makes sense?
Yeah, 100%. I think some of the founders, honestly, these are friends. They're not even portfolio companies that I've helped in the past. I like to do kind of like a 20 to 30 minute Twitter audit with my friends and just be totally brutal about their tweets. Like we're going to just review 10 or 20 tweets and I'm going to rip it apart and I'm going to tell you why it's good and why it's not good.
I would be very scared to do that with you.
But I think you'd come out of it the other side and be like, oh, wow, okay. This is because typically when you put something out on Twitter, your audience isn't giving you feedback. The only feedback you're getting is it getting likes or comments or retweets? That's the only data you have. Nobody's really commenting, hey, I like this, but really could amend the tone, such and such. Nobody's really giving that. And so I like this window of being able to give folks some feedback. I think one mindset that people really need to get in when they're doing communications is that communications is a product. And if you're a founder, you understand, if you're a great founder, you understand how to make great products, right? Because product creation is ultimately an empathetic process. It's deeply understanding your customer's need and then giving them something that satisfies that need. Twitter is the exact same way. We think of it as a very selfish means to our end. Hey, I want to put something out there because I want to get attention on my protocol. No, that's not how it works. The way that it works is you need to have deep empathy for what your customer need is and then give them the messaging product that they want. And so oftentimes I see people put stuff out there on Twitter and it's like, why isn't it working? Well, I hate to tell you, but like no one really cares about what you just said, right? And it could be anything from something really, really technical and obscure and very illegible. It could be something personal that's not necessarily relevant or on brand. And so I love working with people and helping them understand what is the product that I'm putting out in the world and why do people want it. And I think it's a very continuous process. But you have to kind of constantly reflect on, am I putting out the best product out there? And you can't be lazy. The analogy that I have from another mentor of mine, DeFi Edge, he's like, are you putting out a home cooked meal or a reheated turkey dinner? Because people can also tell if you're not really trying hard, right? A home cooked meal is going to be like you slaving over that content and making it sound really good and refining that product, just like you would with your quote unquote real product. Reheated turkey dinner is, I'm going to spend 10 seconds and tick the box because I'm supposed to have to tweet or I'm supposed to have to message something.
Great points. How important do you think Twitter is for these crypto founders? And, should they be home cooking meals? Do they have to if it's not something that they don't necessarily want to do?
I don't necessarily think you have to, but maybe I'll use the Socratic method and pose the question back. Like, can the two of us working together right now name a successful project in crypto or not in crypto that is not synonymous with its founder?
Really.
I've run this exercise a couple times. I can think of maybe a couple. Like Lido is very successful. I don't think it's synonymous with its founders. I literally can't. It's so hard for me to think of many more. And so when founders say, I don't really have time for this, I'm a little bit like, why do you think this isn't the most important thing that you have to do? What could be more important? And the way you asked a question about, founder communication versus corporate communication. Well, they're both entities, right? Not to get too Mitt Romney, but your company's a person too. But your company is a person, right? It's basically like a person and you're a person. And who do you think is more appealing as a person? Is it a corporate entity or you? And by the way, the corporate identity also needs to be developed as a standalone identity. And this from brand strategy and whatever, but it also needs to fit an archetype. It also has to have a tone, a voice, a personality. And so what's easier to invent an entire corporate personality, which is a fake human that's imbued with personality, or to just be you? As a founder, you are the company. And that's also my belief as an investor. The company is the founder is the company. Much easier to be authentic to your viewpoint on the world and let that be the voice. So, I'm very, very biased, as you can tell, toward founders and founder-led, not only founder-led communications, but founder-led everything. I think it's a big mistake to think that you can let your company stand alone without your influence.
I mean, Coinbase or Block Demon are two that come to mind where they're quite successful, but but you're aware of the founders for sure. And Constantine from Block Demon is someone that has mentored me and is a fantastic leader, but he's separated himself a little bit from the company in a way. But yes, such great points. And I do think there's such an opportunity on, using these tools. Have you used any other platforms? Do you think that, how does LinkedIn play a role, for example, or other social platforms, in terms of raising awareness and building the founder-led thought leadership?
Yeah, for better or worse, I think if we actually listed all the marketing or communications outlets in crypto, I think we'd have a pretty short list, right? We'd have the industry publications, we'd have events, we'd have Twitter. I hesitate to say that's basically where it ends. Maybe Discord. You can maybe add, community comms on Discord. LinkedIn is largely not appropriate for crypto, in my opinion. LinkedIn is also, in my opinion, a very fantastic social channel. It's just not where our community hangs out. And the reason why I think LinkedIn is really fantastic is it's highly linear, and they've communicated to users that it's highly linear. In other words, if you put something on LinkedIn, your followers will see it. I went to my 15-year college reunion a couple of weeks ago. saw a bunch of people I hadn't seen in 15 years. They were like, John, I see your LinkedIn content all the time. And I was like, what? This is like deeply confusing to me as a Twitter user because nobody says that. Nobody on Twitter says, hey, I'm seeing all your tweets. Unless it went hyper viral, there's no way all whatever, 80,000, 90,000 of my followers are seeing my tweets. It's not deterministic in that way. The algorithm either decides to pick it up or it decides not to pick it up. And so I think LinkedIn is kind of one of the last great hopes for communicating directly with an audience outside of email. It's just unfortunate that crypto doesn't hang out there. And so unless you're institutional in some way, unless you need to talk to corporate entities, unless you need to talk to normies, essentially, I wouldn't recommend most folks create on LinkedIn.
Do you use video or photo content on either of the channels?
Yeah, for sure. We know the algorithm really emphasizes dwell time. So anything that makes somebody look and stay, and video is pretty good at that. If you're producing a good video, people will look and watch and stay on the tweet. They'll click, they'll engage. Same with a photo. That's why you're seeing all of these kind of screenshot essay accounts do super well, which I find hilarious because a screenshot essay is just text put into image form. So there's something deeply broken about your text-based social media platform if it prioritizes an image of text over actual text. Like that blows my mind that we've gotten to that point. But regardless, that is the sad truth that I think those screenshot essays are doing really well because the algorithm is prioritizing engagement and images engage better than text.
Well, I feel like on LinkedIn, anytime I post any kind of video or photo content, it does perform so well because nobody else is doing it, really. It's, like you said, like direct to the audience. It's kind of wild. And same with Twitter to an extent, too. Honestly, because it's just this big white space where no one's really like obviously Instagram and other social channels, which I wouldn't say are as relevant for our industry, but that you might use personally are very photo and video driven. These two kind of aren't. And so when you use content like that, I feel like it performs really well.
I totally agree. I mean, it's not only algorithmic emphasis, but I think all these UGC user-generated content platforms are teaching us like a very sad truth. There's this saying in, UX design that users don't read. Well, like people don't read. People don't like to read. Reading is hard. I think of this too. I have to read so many words in a given day. I'd rather just click on a video. Just give it to me straight in my eyeballs, So I think we're kind of learning that it's tough. It's a big cognitive load. We're overwhelmed. We have 1,000 feeds and 1,000 Telegram groups. Like it's hard to read. Human
nature, right? And we're marketing to humans. So
100%.
So you've been in crypto for a few years, and I'm curious how, you mentioned that it's drawn in many smart people over the past few years. I'm curious where you think that we're headed. Like, what does the next 5-10 years look like here?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be the first to say I have no idea. It's my job to kind of find folks who have a very strong belief in direction. Here's what I'll say about this inflection point in crypto. I think this is very consensus, but the infrastructure is there. We have every level of abstraction imaginable. We have hyper-performant chains. We have amazing cross-chain abstraction and infrastructure. We have wallet abstraction, gas abstraction. Any word you can create in crypto has an abstraction layer built on top of it. We have single sign-on. We have Coinbase Wallet with passkeys. Soon you'll be able to transact directly on chain with a centralized exchange balance. We have this deep integration of centralized, decentralized, Web 2, Web 3. Everything's a lot easier. Onboarding is easier. Now is the time for applications. If we're ever going to see a quote unquote breakout application, I'll put an asterisk on this, not based on the conventional paradigm, which is essentially some form of financialization, right? Or even if it is financialization, if there is a time for a universal crypto app that's appealing to billions of people, now is the time. And I actually think the excuses have run out for our industry. And by the way, I think I'm extraordinarily bullish crypto long-term, extraordinarily bullish. I think I've always believed in crypto as apocalypse insurance, where if something really terrible happens, I can memorize 20 words and go anywhere in the world with this huge chunk of my net worth. And I think as the world becomes more chaotic, that the price of that insurance is going to continue going up. I'm a very, very long-term believer in Bitcoin. I'm a big long-term believer in obviously all the technology that we're building. That being said, though, there has been this notion of new internet, right? And a lot of people have promoted this narrative of Web3 is the new internet. The size of the prize is basically the entire internet. This is a better way of imbuing ownership into everything that we do online. Okay, if that is to materialize, we're in the correct window. It's going to happen within the next 3 to 5 years, or maybe never. Like, I think we're fully ready for that vision to be realized. And I'm super excited to invest in stuff that fits that puzzle, right? Let's pull every lever of abstractions imaginable. Let's throw out all the excuses and be super pragmatic and say it's going to be as easy as a Web2 application to use something on Web3. Okay, let's see if that technology solves a problem for people. My fundamental belief is we're going to find that. That's going to exist. There's going to be a global scale consumer application within the next 3 to 5 years. I'm waiting for it. I'm looking for it. I think so is everyone else. But I think now's the time.
Well, I've been waiting for it longer than you. And it's just, I think I've built a lot of patience and also resilience over the years. It crushes me to hear you say it's 3 years or never. I don't believe that. I think it's inevitable. It's just a matter of timing, but the timing keeps getting pushed. When I first got sucked in 2016, I really believed, and I didn't understand technology cycles. And so I was so naive but I really believe when people were talking about, like the concept of zero knowledge, for example, that I know you understand deeply, like being able to leverage personal information for private and in a private way, permissionless, was so attractive. And I thought, wow, this is going to change everything about healthcare and, the way we interact and how we use finance. And that was, 8 years ago or almost 9. And here we are. And it's still not really, it's still kind of like a hypothetical. Sounds like a great idea, but we're not really using it yet.
Yeah.
So
I think there's still tons to be done in zero knowledge privacy, encryption, but just on public blockchains, what are we missing? We have all the capital. We have all the awareness. We have the ultra fast and high performing chains. We have all the abstraction layers. We have beautiful UX. We have the buy-in of major centralized organizations with billions of dollars at their disposal. The ETFs are live. Gen Z is going to start putting 1 to 2% of their portfolio into Bitcoin and ETH. So I think the tough question I have to ask is, what are we missing technically? What box have we not ticked for this application to exist? I struggle to think of it. If it's not already here within the next year, I think we will have ticked all the boxes. So I think now's the time.
Well, I love it. I'll take that positivity and, use it in the future. I think you're right. I mean, we have so much going for us now, all of the things you mentioned, it's only a matter of time. So awesome. Well, John Wu, thank you so much for joining us today. Any closing thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
Just love everyone around you as much as you possibly can and love yourself.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kelley.
Thanks for tuning in to Proof of PR. This episode was brought to you by Melrose PR, the leading provider of communications and PR strategy for Bitcoin and Web3 innovators. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen today. To stay up to date on upcoming guests and news, visit proofofpr.com or follow us on Twitter @proofofpr. Until next time, keep learning, innovating, and hodling.